Hello, and welcome to Unwatchables, the film podcast where two movie buffs talk about the movies that they are most afraid to watch.
What if we said movie enthusiasts instead of movie buffs?
Oh, sure. So, should I say, I'm Marc Dottavio, and then just go silent and let you introduce yourself?
Yeah, that's fine.
Or even start it out with Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by Marc Dottavio and Seth. Check us out on Letterboxd at blah, 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 and new episodes every week wherever fine podcasts are downloaded.
Yeah.
All right, we want to just try another one. Hello, and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast where two film enthusiasts try to separate the art from the trolling from the just plain bad. And ultimately, we will answer the question, if you could, would you unwatch this? I'm Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troy.
And today's film is Tom Green's notorious 2001 gross-out comedy, Freddy Got Fingered. Let's go. So did you watch a lot of MTV growing up? Were you one of those kids without cable?
Oh, I did. It was mainly for seeing some sexy stuff, I think. Because at that point, it wasn't very musically minded already. It was already just like me as a young boy wanting to see Beyonce or something, being hot. But I didn't really see it growing up as like a musical venture. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot more of these, like Jackass shows and stuff like that, if anything.
Right. So did you ever catch the Tom Green show?
No, I had no idea he had a show.
Oh, yeah.
I remember hearing about the show. I remember hearing about this movie forever ago from this guy that I knew in Pittsburgh when I was dating a girl in Pittsburgh. And it was just like, he's the coolest guy. Still is like one of the coolest people that exists probably. He's in a band called Grand Buffet. And he was the first one who showed me this strange, cheap-looking DVD of Freddy Got Fingered, and he was like, "You have to watch that. You have to watch that." In it felt kind of, now I realize, a little bit like Mr. Green talking, where he takes a line and he has to repeat it, and he repeats it and repeats it and repeats it. But it always, I don't know, I always was like, what is that? And why would Jackson like that? It looks dumb as hell. Because I was definitely in full on, if it ain't got a little white C in the corner, I ain't watching it. If it ain't no Criterion, I ain't watching that. I was a big old pretentious asshole at that time.
This really should get a Criterion release.
Yes. I want a director's cut. I want the whole shebang.
I do remember seeing some of Tom Green's show when it was out because it was really popular, and I imagine that has to be the reason that they greenlit a movie for him to make, is that there were probably a whole bunch of other, personalities like that were getting movie deals and other TV shows. And I remember on TRL, he even had a music video for, I think it was called The Bum Song.
The Bum Song? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, somebody out there listening has to remember this. My bum is on the tree. My bum is on the tree. My bum is on the dog. My bum is on me. Something like that. That's just from memory. Those may not be actual.
That sounded like an Eminem song.
So it's actually the Bum Bum Song, and
the Bum Bum
song. It is on Spotify if you want to go check it out after this. But yeah, that's what Eminem is referencing when he says, "My bum is on your lips, and if I'm lucky, you might just give it a little kiss." That's me rapping.
Oh yeah, what is that in the real Slim Shady?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
Wait, but when else does he hump a moose other than this movie? I found that to be a very strange meta moment for my mind to handle. I assumed Eminem was talking about the scene from Freddy Got Fingered where he's wearing the corpse of a dead deer or moose or something, and I figured that's what Eminem was talking about when he says like, and Fred Green can go and hump a moose or something. But it plays at the end of the movie. How can it be possible? When was the moose first humped? I want to know.
But yeah, his show was like, I mean, it was kind of like a prank show. I think there's maybe like talk show elements, but he was in that Jackass era where people were doing stuff like that. And he was very aggressive about it and annoying and obnoxious. And I guess at some point it wasn't enough for him to like pull stunts on other people in like pranks that were filmed. And he kind of moved that to the big screen. And now I think us as the viewers are the ones being pranked. We're the butt of the joke. So yeah, we're getting too far ahead of ourselves here. How would you, maybe based on this movie though, how would you describe Tom Green's like comic voice?
It makes sense that he comes from that 90s, no rules, gross you the fuck out. Like he seems to flow into like what became like Tim and Eric and like Adult Swim or something is more of where it really went. But it does make sense that a lot of that stuff comes from Jackass, which I never really thought about. And it makes sense that it does. He's such an anomaly in that though, that he has such a, in my opinion, a mind that is just really going. It's really like, it's got some shit to say, some shit to do, and it doesn't know what and when to do it at, but it's going to do it. A sort of restless, creative, like energy, clearly, that I don't think a lot of these like more reality pranksters had. I don't think Johnny Knoxville ever had a Freddy Got Fingered in mind for his career. I think they were always like more content with just like the actual brass tacks of real life prank calling, setting people on fire and stuff like that. Not narrative ideas like this.
Yeah, because, I mean, Tom Green is a specific personality, and he does make me think of like a hyperactive little kid who just wants to ping pong off the walls and yell nonsense at people and constantly push the limits and just do everything relentless and juvenile and in extreme bad taste, very just enamored of anything like that. But it is very specifically Tom Green. It's not necessarily, the Jackass guys aren't like comedians, and Tom Green does have something like that going on.
I also find it weird because it is like edgelord kind of bullshit, but somehow a lot of it actually, not all of it, but a lot of it actually ages decently. There's not a ton that is like going out of its way to be offensive in certain ways that would be actually like particularly off-putting, like say politically, or as far as like, then you start thinking about the girl in the wheelchair and things like that. But then again, like the girl in the wheelchair is like this complicated cartoon. It's like it's so ridiculous. That's the thing about a lot of it. It's like you can't latch onto it and find much meaty meaning behind it to get actually offended about it. Because it is all just so like, why is it even there to begin with?
Exactly. That's a good place to start with this, is why does this movie exist? And even before we do that, why don't we just give a little bit of a plot summary? This was written and directed by Tom Green, his one and only film and directorial effort, which puts him in the company of Charles Laughton's The Night of the Hunter. And I mean, may God strike me dead for bringing that movie up in a conversation about Freddy Got Fingered, but this is kind of his one and done masterwork. And there is a plot, there are characters and kind of an arc, even though I'd say that this movie is hostile to all of those ideas in a certain way, but it is there. So you want to take a stab at it? What's this about?
Well, I think the plot is, for me, actually what makes it so fascinating. Because I think, to go back to, you were asking me what I really thought of Mr. Green, and the whole thing is, a lot of his stuff, if you saw it like in stand-up or something, it's not all that funny. It's not all that original. His like stick through the whole movie is just like, oh, there's a pillow over there. Hello, Mr. Pillow. Hello, isn't that a pillow? Now I'm going to say it lower. It's pillow time, isn't it? That whole thing, which, if anything, is like feels like a growth out of like some kind of Sandlerism or something. But in the context of a movie like this, those things just become like grenades in a standard structure, seemingly standard structure, which is like everybody who comes to Hollywood, it seems, and becomes the funny guy or like gets in the writing room and gets their own show that is their own name as the show name. They might get their own movie, and they'll make it so that it's like their backstory. Like they'll never say, they like will probably like never say that it's like, oh, this is my autobiographical movie, but it's clearly a young funny boy who just can't get it together, and he's, in this case, he draws pictures. He's an artist. He loves drawing cartoons of cats that can see through wood, but only wood, and that's what he does. And his parents, Rip Torn is the dad, and the mom is the mom from What About Bob?
Julie Haggerty.
Yes. And they're just like constantly like, why don't you get a job? Why don't you get a job? And like it's this like typical structure, especially for the 90s, like sort of entitled artist 90s kind of thing of like, oh, mom and dad don't understand that I don't want to be a worker drone like them, so I'm going to like continue to just pursue my art and like from the safety of my like white privilege, basically. And I'm getting a little sidetracked, but it's worth saying that the brilliant part is, as it goes along, it's never praising one or the other, really. It's showing the ugliness of the young kid artist who like just is misunderstood and has a vision. Tom Green in this movie is a monster. He is like a ridiculous, horrible person and does horrible things and has like absurd relationships with human beings. And on the other side is, of course, the mom and dad and the authority figures, which are lampooned at every turn. So nobody winds up looking good in this, opposed to most movies like this, where the kid is like, I'm gonna be a star. So his parents give him money. Is it? They give him money and they give him a car or something to fulfill his dreams and go to California and become a famous animator. And it's even framed with music quite often that makes it feel like the scene is not as weird as it actually is. Like that he is driving around and sees a horse, and because the music and it looks like a movie and the cinematography looks like a movie, there's no way that while he's driving he would just stop and see a horse and then hop over to the horse and literally grab the horse's dick and play with the horse's dick for some reason.
Yeah, he doesn't need a reason for any of this stuff.
No, there's no real joke behind it. He hops back in the car, and we have to keep on following this guy. Who is this guy? What's happening with this guy who is clearly messed up? And he's good at skateboarding. I left that out. Whether it's intentional or not, like it becomes this feeling of like a lampoon of 90s like skateboard, like everybody who's a main character in a 90s movie can skateboard. Fred can skateboard, and he's like on the run from the cops at the beginning of the movie at one point, and just for like doing something petty at the mall. But yeah, we're just constantly foiled. It reminds me of something more recent that comes to mind, which is I Think You Should Leave, if you've seen that on Netflix with Tim Robbins. And it's this sketch comedy show. It's brilliant. Have you seen that, Mark?
I have not, but I'm familiar with the memes that have come from that show.
They like have beautiful cinematography, and they set these up like they're great actors to begin with. Like they could do like dramatic roles, it feels like, but they lure you in every time, and they're these short sketches, and you still feel like maybe this one, like it's actually going to be what I think it is, and it never is, because of this like high production value, this music that comes in that feels like it's Hollywood music. It's like the opposite of how like Tim and Eric works, like something like Tim and Eric or Adult Swim a lot of the time is always using this like hyper lo-fi, like in your face, like clearly a green screen, like you instantly know, like I'm in for something goofy and wacky. So that, then, which I love all that. But this approach is so much more like, I don't know, intense to behold.
It constantly keeps you on edge, right? I don't see how you could possibly get bored by the movie no matter what you thought about
it. It's impossible.
In that way, it actually feels dangerous. Just the fact that all of this is actually in a real movie that was made and presumably viewed by producers, studio executives, people who professionally make films all through its development and after it was done, and it still got a wide release. They still let it be called Freddy Got Fingered.
Oh, which we haven't even gotten to that.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But it is hard to think of any kind of ideology behind this because this isn't about its story or characters or anything. It's about whatever kind of jumps into Tom Green's mind at the moment. And you brought up the skateboarding at the beginning, which if you didn't know what you were getting into, it starts off innocuously enough. He's sitting in his bed. He is doing silly voices and kind of rambling nonsense about his drawings. Then he hops onto his skateboard and the Sex Pistols song kicks on and he's skateboarding through the mall.
Oh, there's so awesome.
A security guard is chasing him and he's doing tricks and he runs into a window at the end and comes out. And, so far, so good. And then soon enough, he's out there on the road with another punk song playing and comes across the horse that with its big penis sticking out. And he just gets excited and runs over and just starts grabbing it and flailing away and then hops back into his car. And from that point on, I took notes during this movie, and it basically ended up just being a list of things that we see. And I feel like just being in possession of this list could get me put in jail or something.
Yeah.
If anyone was going to flip through my notebooks and then just see all of this stuff written down, that we might end up in the newspapers.
I mean, just looking at a wiki synopsis of this thing, which it was just like, what?
Yeah. And so the reason we're even talking about this is because there's kind of two different ways to look at this movie. Starting when it first came out to today, there's still plenty of people who are like, this is just the worst thing that I've ever seen. It's offensive, juvenile, stupid.
Oh, your usual person is going to turn this off.
Absolutely. And then there's another line of thinking that this is kind of an avant-garde, surrealist, anti-comedy masterpiece. And I'm not sure either of those fully does justice to it. Of those views, I think there's some truth to both of them.
It's complicated. Yeah, that's why I think it's like so fascinating for me, at least. There's clearly like a unique, rather brilliant perspective at points going on, and also just like dropping the ball in like a like borderline Tommy Wiseau sort of way in other places, coming at it from such a strange angle that the audience is so perplexed. There's also, again, the element of, you mentioned like the Sex Pistols, there's constant like stuff that would be in this movie, wouldn't it? That's supposed to be like a movie for MTV youth culture. But it feels like also like it's lampooning all of that in like a really intense way, while it has like a pop punk soundtrack and stuff. So it's just like, what is it? What is it doing?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes out of the atmosphere that this movie was made in. So I'm sure that this was greenlit partly because this is kind of around the time that there was a boom in these gross out kind of sex comedies, like that American Pie first made really popular. Actually, Eddie K. Thomas, who plays Freddy in this movie, was in American Pie. And I think that that's kind of the basic form that he's starting with here. Now, how deliberately he's deconstructing or subverting it is kind of up for debate, but those are, I think, the elements that are in play here, and then maybe just pushed so far that it just starts to melt your brain. I think this would be a good time here to kind of represent the people who just hate the movie, because there is a part of Roger Ebert's famous 0-star review that I wanted to read.
Oh, God.
Which is all kind of part of the whole joke, isn't it? That the movie got released, people paid to go see it. I can only imagine being in a theater of just regular moviegoers while this terrorist bomb of a movie starts playing. And Roger Ebert had to sit through the whole thing, presumably in like a critic's screening, and then write about it. And he did give it a rare 0-star rating. And I'm just going to read this quick passage here from it. This movie doesn't scrape the bottom of the barrel. This movie isn't the bottom of the barrel. This movie isn't below the bottom of the barrel. This movie doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence with barrels. The day may come when Freddy Got Fingered is seen as a milestone of neo-surrealism. The day may never come when it is seen as funny. And I think that kind of says a lot there.
I don't know. I laughed so hard. I laughed so hard, Mr. Ebert.
Oh, good. That was my question. If this, whether or not this is a milestone of neo-surrealism, is it funny? Did you laugh? And I did laugh at points.
I laughed a lot. I think Mr. Ebert needs to tune in, drop out again with Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Go back to his roots, where he was writing Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and Remember.
Exactly. He should be looking at the spirit of Russ Meyer and Roger Corman.
And Superwoman. Oh, my God.
Yeah, so like you said, it's kind of hard to describe this movie, even if you just read about it, because so much of it is just behavior without motivation, and there's really no kind of tonal cohesion to it. It doesn't try to slip in some kind of lesson or like sentimentality at the end. Like a lot of just lazy bad comedies will still try to just have that in there because they feel like they need it, even though it does it does kind of poke fun at that, I guess, at the end.
Which I think all of that is to its credit. Like I felt very seen by this movie, that it was treating me with respect, that like what I want out of something like this is what it's giving me, which is it never kids itself for a second, which comedies, action movies, thrillers, like so often are so caught up in like, we have to have a love interest somehow in here, even though that's not what we set out to do. And we have to have some sort of like heart to heart with the dad at the end, and like where they really bury the hatchet and it makes sense. And like, even if it's so ridiculous and crazy, like, you know, it can't just be sex. Like American Pie still has to have this like attempt at a lesson at the end. This one doesn't give a shit. And it knows it and it offers you its own versions of those things, and they're all like insane. Like Freddy, not Freddy. I keep on wanting to call him Freddy, which I think people probably do because of the title. But what is his name in the movie? Gordon. Yeah, Gordon meets a woman that, you know, you think it's the most typical meet cute kind of thing, because like, of course, you know, can't just be a funny movie. It's got to have a romantic interest. So he gets his romantic interest, but he finds out that she's in a wheelchair, and the only way she is turned on is through getting whacked in the legs with bamboo. But they play the scene like this is that moment where they laugh and they like, you know, you believe that Adam Sandler and Winona Ryder and Mr. Deeds are really like hitting it off, and like, wow, they like, I didn't know I went for a funny movie, but I didn't know I would be seeing something that, you know, would touch my soul too. You know, but like, again, the music and everything else is telling you that, but what you're seeing, you know, is like horrifying.
Yeah, those Adam Sandler movies in particular, they all get very sentimental. At least most of them do. They always have a love story that ends up being genuine, and a lot of times they actually try to go for pathos in a very obvious way.
Mm-hmm. Which, you know, I like Mr. Deeds. I like Mr. Deeds and all that shit. But you know what I'm saying.
Actually, there is another connection between the Adam Sandler movies and this, which is Drew Barrymore, because she co-starred with him in a lot of things. Famously married Tom Green for a brief time.
Yes.
And she appears in this movie. There's a lot of real actors in this. besides her, there's Anthony Michael Hall. You mentioned the parents. There's Harland Williams, who's in all the, Farrelly Brothers movies. If you made a comedy in the late 90s, early 2000s, then you have Harland Williams, who plays his friend in this movie.
And you got Shaq.
Shaq, cameo from Shaq. I mean, everyone has their moments as straight men, but also pretty much everybody in this movie is deranged in some way or another. The innocent bystanders maybe are the ones who get it the worst. But, Rip Torn in particular, he is so getting into the spirit of it.
Oh,
I mean,
God.
the late departed Rip Torn, I think, died a few years ago. And we can only hope in his Oscar reel, him getting covered in elephant semen is right there at the end.
And the whole fuck me in the ass thing. Yeah.
Yeah, he pulls his pants down. I would love to see just the initial behind the scenes meetings, the table read of this. I guess presumably all of these actors had agents and were able to read an idea of what the movie was, and here they all are.
No, because all those kind of actors, it's very common for serious actors like that to be oh no, I'm not too serious. I will be. I can see it on the page there. I'll belittle myself a little bit and be a little silly, but here they get way more than they bargained for. They're made into monsters.
Yeah, and that's why I brought this up, because you were talking about the girlfriend character in the wheelchair, who's played by, I believe her name is Marissa Coughlin. Not quite sure how to say her last name. I'm not sure I've seen anything else that she's done. But she's almost the female version of Tom Green's character. She's almost as weird and aggressive as he is. And I think that her and Rip Torn are the ones who commit to this 100%. And that does help having a little bit of that ownership, even when she's got to constantly, all the blowjob jokes and stuff, she kind of gets her way through it just through sheer force of will. She always seems in control, not the victim. And yeah, she does. She shoots across the screen in a goddamn rocket in her chair.
Because she's a rocket scientist. That's her whole thing. She has a dream of making a wheelchair go I don't know how many miles an hour, but that's her dream. And it's again, shown with watery eyes and I just got a little dream, that I amazing.
Yeah. And, Tom Green has to be the one to beg her. I want to go on a date. All you do is blow me all day long, which, is that funny? I don't know. Not really.
Well, they have a very funny relationship. They have that whole dynamic where he wants to go on more dates with her and be more romantic, but she just wants to stay at home and suck his cock. That's what she's into.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess that seemed like a great idea in the writer's room, but in a movie like this, I guess that does play differently than it would have in a more conventional comedy. And every the scenes kind of unfold almost like a little series of vignettes, and they just kind of check off all of the the whole list of things. There's animals, sexual things and violent things with animals. There's violence against children. You have physically disabled people, women, child molestation comes up quite a bit, and just gore. Were you surprised how gory this movie is?
So violent, so bloody. And again, adding to the feeling that I was a little frightened. I didn't know just how dark this would go. And it goes pretty dark. And it gets really intense. You don't know, who's going to rip whose head off at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real Hollywood production, and he has a budget and resources, so...
And he uses it.
Yes. When he cuts open a deer carcass, intestines spill out, and he drapes himself in it. There's blood everywhere. He's just running around, screaming his head off.
It's good you brought that up, because, I mean, if you haven't seen this movie, you're probably wondering, why does that happen? Why would he do that? What in the plot brings him to that? Well, it's right where we left off with the plot synopsis, I think, because he does get to L.A. through a series of very Tom Green type interjections and stuff. He does get to talk to an animation director through after talking to, what does he do to Drew Barrymore? Drew Barrymore is the secretary.
Yeah, he comes in and says he's trying to find this guy played by Anthony Michael Hall, and he says his wife has died. I need to see him right now. And she goes, Linda? And then, yes, Linda. Yes, she is dead. Linda is dead. And he keeps coming back and talking about Linda. I think that was actually one of the more like conventionally just funny parts of the movie. I did laugh during that because she starts sobbing like, Linda, he loved Linda. It's so unnecessary.
Even in that, she is convincing too, though. Like, she seems distraught. And you are like, oh my God, like, she thinks Linda's actually dead. But all this guy really wants is to give this animation director guy his pamphlet full of cat drawings, which is what he does.
Yeah, the next shot, he's in the restaurant with him dressed as an English Bobby for some reason that goes unexplained. And he's actually surprisingly receptive to looking about it at the drawings and discussing it with him. And he's the one who tells him that you need to, what does he say, get inside the animals?
You got to get inside the animals or something. He says something about getting inside the heads of the animals, I guess. Which was it was kind of confusing, right? Because he is going back home with his tail between his legs after that. He's driving back home. And he finds a deer carcass on the side of the road. And he says, he has a flashback. Gotta get inside the animals. So he crawls inside the roadkill and dances around with it on him and stuff. And that's yet another, like, horsecocks type scene where then he does that and hops back in his car. Movie keeps going.
Yeah, I'm not sure they ever referenced that anything again as far as a plot point about getting into character or it helping him with his animation. He just goes on to the next thing. And that's kind of the movie as a whole. It's kind of attitude, I think. While we're talking about bloody scenes, maybe the scene that you would take out of this movie to show it like representatively would be where he's visiting his friend in the hospital and a woman starts giving birth next to him.
Oh, it's incredible.
And once again, sans any motivation or rationale, he just walks over to her and says, I'm going to deliver the baby. She says, no, get a doctor. He says, I am a doctor. And delivers a baby.
Yeah, who's the friend? I don't even remember.
That's Harland Williams.
Okay. He's also a fuck up, right? Is he also a fuck up, or does he have a job?
He does have a job, but he is kind of the typical like slacker friend who hangs out with him and they skateboard. And he gets grievously injured just kind of out of nowhere and has a bone sticking out of his leg. And it does take Tom Green more than a few seconds to suddenly there's a shot of him just licking the bone. No particular reason.
Yeah, he's got to be licking the bone.
And then that goes, I think, shortly into the scene where the lady starts giving birth. For some reason, there's other patients who start playing tambourines during it.
Yeah, it's like this crazy mystical scene. It's just all these ridiculous elements, which is quite often how the scenes work. They're just like these strange elements all doing their own thing and not necessarily lining up, but they're all working towards this like they're building towards this crescendo of just absurdity, which in this is when he pulls out the baby and the baby is not breathing or something.
She says, why isn't it crying? And right there, my stomach is dropping. Like, what is this movie doing? And his response is sleeping? But he does end up bringing it to life by swinging it around by its umbilical cord.
Oh, I'll wake your baby up. I'm going to wake your baby up. He swings it around.
And again, we have very good effects here. This looks like a real newborn baby being flown around. The ladies with the tambourines are all splattered in blood and viscera.
It's a real baby covered in gore that Tom Green has on his set to be covered in gore.
Yeah, I mean, what do you say about a scene like that? It happens. I don't really have any analysis of it. My jaw was agape throughout it all.
There is something meat and potatoes about his approach to shit like this, which is like he wants you to have a reaction. He wants you to feel something. He wants to have an intense moment. And like almost like at a Lynch level, where like Lynch doesn't necessarily know why he's throwing these things at you, right? Why these four elements? Why is the lady talking in German all of a sudden? Like, why is this happening? Why does the light look like that? He doesn't have a concrete answer, and he doesn't want to hear you question it. He just wants to give it to you. And like, not saying that Tom Green is at David Lynch's level or something, but he gets you, he injects it right into you.
Yeah, there's a sense that he's equally okay with you laughing or storming out of the theater and missing the rest of the movie. And that kind of goes to his whole like prankster roots, this whole vibe of just wanting to, even 20 years after this movie came out, sitting home alone watching it, the joke is on me. And I can kind of enjoy that to an extent.
I think that will be the thing for most viewers and us through this conversation. Maybe we don't need to get into that totally, because that's the big thing about this movie. Is it purely trolling? Is it all just that sort of, he's making it because he fucking hates you and he thinks you're stupid and he doesn't give a shit if you think it's funny or not. He just wants to like roll around with his pants down in front of you and laugh about how you watched it or something.
Yeah, because I do think he is trying to be funny. This is his idea of something that is funny, but coming through his particular sensibility, that is a very strange thing. And it's almost like I can get in on the joke, even if it's against me or the audience. Like, there's still something about how this looks like a Hollywood movie and was released like one that's part of the whole joke that actually is funny, not necessarily in a hostile way, but there is some hostility there. I'm just not sure it's towards the audience necessarily. It's very hard to pin down.
The big thing is hindsight really benefits this movie, and that's why it makes sense that it's become more popular with time, because it's such a comment on its time. It's like it's so of that zeitgeist and pushing all the like zeitgeist trends to their craziest manifestation. But that's the thing, I don't attribute that kind of foresight and like intense thought process to Tom Green necessarily. I think he was a good listener at this point. He was just soaked in his time and kind of literally vomited it up on screen. And that's kind of how the movie feels to me. It just like gross out skateboards, gore, no rules, no parents, all that kind of shit.
Yeah, and at the time, movies like, the big comedy hits like American Pie and There's Something About Mary, there was a certain element of them just trying to gross out each other. Whether it's the hair gel thing and There's Something About Mary, American Pie has the pie fucking and other kind of gross things. And there were a lot of terrible, terrible comedies that came out around then that were just trying to push that limit as far as it could go. So I could see Tom Green being like, okay, you guys really want to see how gross a movie can get? Like, what's the natural, like, inevitable terminal endpoint that you could possibly push any of this? And I don't think you could go much further than this. Like, this almost has more in common with a movie like Antichrist than it does with those comedies.
Right. Well, which I like what you're saying there, but I don't see it as, and it's hard to know. I'm only speculating. I really don't know this guy. I haven't researched much, but I can only speculate that what it feels like to me is happening on screen is not like an antagonistic, like, what are these gross out kids doing? Like, they're so stupid, I hate them. Like, no, he's one of them. It's like one of those cases where someone walks over, it's like, oh, you guys are telling jokes? You guys are telling dirty jokes? And then, like, the guy, like, takes it way too far and insults everybody in the room. And then is like, but is doing so in good faith, I think, to make these people laugh. But
sprays them with elephant jizz.
The result of him basically doing what they couldn't do, like, he does it way better and way more intense. It like causes everybody to leave the bar, right? Like, and be like, what an asshole. Like, why would you insult me like that? It's like, but the guy, like, and I've seen this in situations, the guy is just like, I thought that was the game. I thought that's the game, that we're trying to gross each other out. I thought we were, so I shit on the floor, I was like, no, nobody wanted you to shit on the floor. Like, but it is like, I don't know, I get this feeling that he's just like, he just wants to fit in, or almost part of him does want to fit in. And he does so by shitting on the floor, and everybody runs away and hates this movie.
And it kind of toes this line then of mean-spiritedness, right? Because so much of it is based in this. And I'll give one example, which I think is something that just flat out doesn't work, and that this movie is definitely not free of jokes that are just clearly gone for that just don't work. There are elements of that, and you can really see them going just for the shock factor every time that they like violently attack this little kid who keeps getting hit in the face with stuff, but not just hit in the face with stuff. He'll trip and fall, and the camera will just linger on his pain and suffering and sobbing and blood gushing out of his mouth, and then just go to the next scene, and then he'll have bruises on his face for the rest of the scenes.
It's so funny.
Oh, well, maybe we disagree then about that working or not.
It's just so, once again, it's like the oldest kind of deal of like that's the silly guy. Oh, every time he's the one guy throws something, it's gonna hit that guy over there, isn't it? It's like, it feels like old vaudeville or something. And here it's just like this 7-year-old kid who is very much like looks like a 7-year-old kid. That's why it's so disturbing that like he hits him with his car and he is bleeding, and like it's just like keeps happening to him, and it's not, but it's once again, like, which we've seen that kind of stuff before, but it's again taken to this level of just like, oh my God, you went too far.
Well, and I remember, I think it was Scary Movie 3 or something, that there was a running gag where there was a little kid who just constantly kept running into things, ran over in a very like cartoonish way. And it was a very easy joke, not a very funny movie. It was all clearly just to get people in the audience kind of, spiked up and surprised, like, oh man, they're beating the crap out of this little kid. It's so funny. And it does have this kind of cartoonish like quality to it. So, I mean, you think that there's something intentional here maybe with the way that it just lingers on the kid crying and screaming and then just cuts to the next shot?
I think it's an example of a sort of consistency with the movie's goal, basically, which is to take everything on paper is like the intent is rather generic. They're old ideas. They're like the idea of slapstick is like the oldest low-hanging fruit as far as comedy is concerned. But he's going to enter the race like he's not on a horse. He's driving a car and leaving all the horses behind or something. And once again, it's just like you're not even doing it right. Like, and that's sort of like the thing that I find like so absurd about it. It's just like you've totally left the game behind or something.
Well, after the first time it happens too, they start to set it up in like very obvious ways so that every time you see this kid, they're at a fancy restaurant, this fancy restaurant that just everyone happens to be at the same time, having dinner with his dad on his birthday. Like, can I get a piece of birthday cake? Oh, yeah, you sure can. One piece of birthday cake for the birthday boy. And you're just waiting to see what the item is that eventually is going to come over and bloody and batter him over his birthday cake.
Yeah.
So there's a little extra bit to the joke, I guess, by the way they keep blatantly setting that up to happen over and over again. But there's a sense of really rubbing your face in it, I think, with the way it presents a lot of those too. But you're right, it is in the spirit of the film overall.
Yes.
Maybe we should mention at some point, even though it doesn't really matter, but why the movie's called Freddy Got Fingered. Freddy is his brother, played by the guy from American Pie, and maybe he's the only real like straight man character, like major character in the movie. One of the more like absurdist jokes is that Tom Green tells a therapist that his dad, Rip Torn, is molesting Freddy. Even though Freddy is a 25-year-old man living in the house, they still have a social worker and a cop come and force him to leave and go to it's called like the Institute for Sexually Molested Children,
yes.
which is filled with all actual children that he just has to live with now. For some reason, they're watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on TV. It's just, whatever. And it doesn't go anywhere. He ends the movie still in there. And it's just this little aside. And I guess just a reason to make the title have the word fingered in it.
The title is as arbitrary as everything else. I do just want to point out some interesting bits of trivia regarding the title, Freddy Got Fingered. The French release has a title that translates to "Go fuck yourself, Freddy," and the Japanese release's title translates to "Freddy's Obscene Relation."
That's so cool.
Speaking of like a director's cut, I believe that the DVD for this does have, it's labeled as a PG version of the film, and it's 3 minutes long.
Whoa.
Which is just a whole other extra joke on top of a joke.
He did a lot of stuff like that with the promotion. So the DVD release of this, this is the kind of thing you lose now with everyone watching movies on streaming services, but the DVD had a feature where you could play an audio track that included the audience reaction from the film's premiere.
Whoa.
He did a ton of other stuff like that. You probably can imagine he won a bunch of Razzie Awards for this. And I guess he showed up at the Razzies and accepted the awards, gave a speech, but then at the end of his speech pulled out a harmonica and just played the harmonica until no one knew when he was going to stop. And it had gone on so long that they dragged him off the stage. And from what I could find out, this wasn't a bit that they were in on. He just actually went to the Razzies and intended to play a harmonica until they forced him to stop.
What a cool guy. Oh my God.
You could look at the whole Freddy Got Fingered project as just one like piece of performance art with many different angles to it. That's kind of a Rocky Horror thing too. I know that the movie has some kind of a track that you can listen, like some kind of commentary type track that sounds like an audience watching the movie. And if you go and see that show live, the audiences will always yell out certain things that sound even scripted, like it's very much a back and forth, which this isn't on that level, but you could see that like seeing this in a room full of people would be something similar to that, or seeing The Room, speaking of Tommy Wiseau, when that movie first came out and started doing midnight screenings and stuff. This seems like this would be made for a midnight circuit, maybe.
I suppose. Part of me does really feel, though, like Tom Green had something earnest like behind this, and he was like, I feel like he did kind of think like maybe it would go over a little better than it did.
Yeah, it did end his film career quite swiftly.
I doubt he wanted this, right? Like it being instantly just like holy shit. Like it was not even a cult classic upon like the next year or the next 2 years. It seems it was like it's still like up for debate. It is not at like The Room status at all.
No. And being given like a starring vehicle like this and then deciding to do this, you do have to wonder how much of it was maybe this is the one chance I'll ever get, so I got to make my mark, and how much of it was really just him not being capable of doing something that would connect with a mainstream audience and continue a career in this fashion.
It seems like this is what he's got, you know? It seems like this is what he's got. I think he gave his all, because there's a lot in here. There's some crazy shit in here. It all reaching maybe the craziest scene is like towards the end where he finally takes his dad to Pakistan without him knowing by cutting out a section of the house, and they like fly it because he gets $1 million eventually towards the end, because he does finally get the animator guy to buy his Zebra People show or whatever that he comes up with, and we even get to see part of it,
which is just as weird and awful as you would imagine.
Yes. And then he uses the money to fly a section of the house without his dad knowing, with him and his dad inside of it, to Pakistan in the desert. And I think I read somewhere that they actually went like to some other country to shoot this, which is just nuts to think about, like them leaving the United States or for this movie. But they just drop it, and then there's just like the joke. The joke is like they're in the middle of the desert now. Yeah,
there's quite a section of the movie that's after he finally sells his cartoon for $1 million, which is him just wasting the money. And it really just hammers home that this was never about his journey as a cartoonist or self-actualization. He just gets the money and blows it, and then has kind of a little moment with his dad. Once again, Rip Torn really needs to get some credit for this movie. for going along with it like 110%. And I did like a kind of really bizarre joke when they both come back and they have these long beards from being out in the desert for so long.
Oh yeah, it becomes like a national, like a global story. They show like all these news markets like talking about, in the story everyone's talking about a father and son like lost in Pakistan or something.
And they finally cut back to Freddy watching from his institute. And for some reason, he has a giant beard too, just like them, which makes no sense whatsoever.
They've been gone. You know?
But again, everything in this movie isn't just a shocking thing. You know, there's that whole scene where he's in the shower wearing scuba gear and gets into a fight with his dad, where he's just randomly wearing a backwards business suit at one point, just doing typical
backwards
Tom
man.
Green nonsense. Yeah, I'm backwards man, backwards man.
I can walk backwards easier than you can.
The whole famous, sausage scene.
Yes, there's a couple different sausage scenes.
Yeah, and that stuff seems all just like pure Tom Green outside of the trying to use the medium of film to just massacre everything around him. Yeah, and that awful Shaq cameo at the end.
I love that. Yes, because he tells his mother, "If I were you, I would go out and I would fulfill my sexual desires. I would fulfill my sexual desires." Does the repeating thing that he loves to do, and I would sleep with basketball players, sleep with them. And then you see her in a later scene with Shaq in bed, and she's like distracted by the news story about them being lost in Pakistan, and Shaq is jealous, and he's like, "Are you still in love?"
Oh dear. Well, that kind of brings us to our ultimate question that we ask at the end of every episode, which is, if you could, would you unwatch this movie? Which I'm going to guess, it sounds like we're both somewhere on some level of having been stimulated in some way by this movie. So I wouldn't unwatch it. It's really hard for me to decide like how to categorize, how to rate a unclassifiable film like this. I don't know.
I have plans to watch it again very soon.
All right.
I need to watch it with other people. I think I've got the like stupid bug that I think certain fans of this movie have a little bit. I think it's one of those that is going to be fun to get to see like various reactions from friends, and it's to glean like some idea of my own feelings about it from that too. It's just like, what do you think of this? What do you get from this?
Catch Seth's follow-up reaction on our sister podcast, Rewatchables.
Oh, God.
Yep, Rewatchables, where I watch Freddy Got Fingered
every week,
Monday through Friday. Take the weekends off, but I will say that I walk away feeling that this is not just a troll thing, that it isn't just an edgelord trying to be edgy for the sake of being edgy necessarily. I think the big thing is, if Tom hates the audience in a certain respect, it's because he kind of hates himself. And that seems like kind of on... I think I see that worn on his sleeve a bit. But I think whether he wants to admit it at this time or admit it now, maybe in later life, or never admit it, I think it's true that he is among the masses as well, that does respond to this narrative that he's trying to shit all over, right? The narrative of the goofy guy with a dream, which at the end of the day, this is autobiographical in its own way. He was a guy who was trying to sell a comedy show. He was a creative guy who didn't want to just be like everybody else, and he had his idea and he wanted to get it out there. And, he eventually wound up in LA and all that. But I think there's a part of him that, he knows he's a part of that. He wants to lampoon that. He wants to poke at it, just like he wants to poke at the audiences who eat up what comes out of LA, like goofy Adam Sandler movies that don't make any sense. But, I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think he wants people to enjoy being shocked and appalled in a way. It sounds like that was kind of the reaction that we ultimately had too, was that a lot of things are wrong and it is dumb and certain ways on many levels reprehensible, total disregard for almost the craft of filmmaking in some ways, and storytelling, but it's ultimately like a very pure distillation of what is really in his heart. And you could feel that, and it came just at the right like time and place that this was the form that it took and the things that it was playing off of. And to this day, you can't like look away from it. And I have to admire it and even enjoy it at certain times, while at the same time being like, I don't know if good is even a category that should be in the conversation as far as evaluating a movie like this. It's like it's a happening. It's an artifact. It's out there. It exists. It will find you. It's an element in nature.
I think that this will come up with a lot of the movies that we wind up doing on this podcast. If it's off-putting, like this movie and a lot of movies that are considered unwatchable, to me, it's sort of like off-putting in the way that metal music or something like that is off-putting, right? It's like by almost, unless they were just totally out to lunch, it's by design that this is upsetting and that this is like dissonant and not harmonious and not striking the audience just the way they want it, right? It's something else. It avoids easy things like good or bad or things like that.
I mean, sometimes you want to try to objectively evaluate someone getting covered in elephant semen, but maybe it's really just something that's meant to be experienced.
I think we got to do it ourselves. Like, we all have to get cummed on by an elephant for the first time.
Absolutely.
Look at me. My bum is on the rail. My bum is on the man.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.
My bum is on the Swedish. My bum is on the gum. My bum is on the gum. I can blow a bubble with my bum. My bum is on the ship, the battleship. I hope they don't shoot the cannon in my bum and shoot poo all over the place. Poo, 'cause that isn't very fun.